Hi there, this is Lecture 11, Nature in the New World. Before we begin Lecture 11, I want to note the aesthetic differences between the previous lecture presentations and the remaining presentations for this module, and likely for modules 3 and 4. As I mentioned at the beginning of the semester and on the syllabus homepage, the online platform for this course is under construction as I transition the course from face-to-face to fully online. While all intellectual content and assessment tools are complete, I am tasked with constructing the infrastructural elements. That means our Canvas site itself and the lecture presentations as we progress. I apologize for this inconvenience and the somewhat boring visual content of the remainder of your lecture presentations. Okay, so we concluded Lecture 10 by identifying how the exploratory missions of the Age of Discovery and Enlightenment resulted in the European occupation of territories in order to exploit resources like raw materials. We also briefly introduced the new United States and its relationships to colonialism through Manifest Destiny. In the next series of lectures, we will examine at length how European ideas about nature were interpreted and used in the U.S., especially in artworks. European explorers and settlers brought with them ideas about nature and civilization. The contrast of nature with culture we have been discussing is called a dichotomy. A dichotomy is a division of something into two sharply defined and contrasting parts. And I'll repeat that. A dichotomy is a division of something into two sharply defined and contrasting parts. The nature-culture dichotomy divides the material conditions of life, of our existence, like our environments, as well as entities, like human beings, animals, and plants, into binary categories, nature and culture. Culture is that which is controlled. Nature is that which is uncontrolled. And I'd like for you to note on this diagram how the nature-culture dichotomy is structured. You'll notice on the left we have a column of various descriptors that are associated with culture, and on the right a column of descriptors associated with nature. Culture, as we know, has been historically prioritized over nature. And so culture is associated with the controlled, civilized, paradise or gardens, moral behavior or conduct, productive actions and practices, order, and human culture, of course. Nature has been associated with the uncontrolled, the wild or primitive, as people often refer to them, wilderness, immoral actions and behaviors, fallow landscapes, meaning unproductive or uncultivated landscapes, chaos, and of course, natural environments. Culture has been valued over nature for millennia. Remember our discussion about the genesis of the concept of nature at the beginning of this module? Well, the nature-culture dichotomy has had significant tangible consequences for our world. Remember our discussion of the resulting categorization of groups of people as civilized or primitive? Again, tangible implications. So, if Europeans feared wild, unpopulated, uncontrolled, immoral, chaotic, and fallow wild nature, why would colonists pack up and leave civilization and settle in what they perceived as a wilderness? Funny thing, early settlers believed widely distributed promotional accounts, or advertisements as we would refer to them, of this new world that described it as an earthly paradise. These promotional materials were crafted by developers and land speculators who were attempting to encourage settlement of the new land for territorial purposes and economic gain. Promoters anchored this notion of the New World as Eden in the paradise myth of European antiquity that asserted an earthly paradise, a second Eden, existed somewhere in the world, likely to the west. This paradise myth had developed around early stories of the Christian Eden, the Greek Arcadia, which was based on pastoralism, and other legends of an earthly paradise awaiting discovery. Well, this new continent was indeed west of Europe, and based on early reports from explorers, it seemed to fit the myth. A temperate climate, garden-like beauty, abundance of resources, and wealth. It was, of course, a shock when pilgrims discovered the New World was not paradise. In the fall of 1620, when William Bradford stepped off the Mayflower, he declared his surroundings, quote, "a hideous and desolate wilderness," end quote. And, with that statement, set a tone of revulsion that would resonate across space and time. Once these settlers discovered the harsh realities of the new continent, they quickly repositioned themselves. Rather than finding God's paradise, they would have to make it. Cotton Mather in 1693 articulated the pilgrim position. Quote, "Wilderness was the stage through which we are passing to the promised land." End quote. The pilgrims intended to bring civilization to the New World by, quote, "enlightening the darkness, ordering chaos, and changing evil into good." End quote. Their modus operandi was to clear-cut forests and kill the native inhabitants. Pioneers would regard their wilderness environment with defiance and hatred, and work vigorously to advance civilization, which was understood as the greatest of God's blessings. Pioneers had reason to dislike what became known as the wilderness condition, living in close proximity to wild country. First, the wild environs were a very real threat to their survival. Many early settlers did not survive their first winter. Second, these early pioneers, especially the Pilgrims and the Puritans, believed that the wilderness was a threat to their very souls and to the civilization of humans. They believed that the freedom from civilization, from laws and social order and religion that the wilderness offered, enabled or encouraged men to behave in a savage or bestial manner. Anybody seen The Revenant? More frightening than physical threats, wilderness temptations pose the threat of social and human degeneration. Pilgrims used the indigenous population's supposed barbarism as an example of the potential for the wilderness to corrupt and thwart human civilization. Bold European explorers, traders, and settlers who chose to move individually as frontiersmen or in small familial groups rather than large communities were considered, quote, "beyond the power of example and check of shame, no better than carnivorous animals, only regulated by the wildness of their neighborhoods." End quote. Of that neighborhood, religious leader Cotton Mather wrote in 1707, quote, "Dragons, droves of devils, and fiery flying serpents are found in the primeval forests." End quote. Like medieval Europeans, these first Americans found that in the New World, the forest darkness hid, quote, "savage men, wild beasts," end quote, and all manner of strange creatures that piqued their fear-affected imaginations. The influence of mythological, biblical, medieval, and Enlightenment understandings of nature and civilization on early American settlers ensured that settlers characterized certain environments as waste and promoted exploitation of those environments. It also functioned to justify the eradication of native peoples as the proper moral behavior. This positioning of nature as needing to be conquered, as needing to give way to culture, gave meaning and purpose to the lives of many frontiersmen and pioneers. The pioneer was able to cast himself as a tool of progress, the protagonist of Enlightenment rationalism, who was performing a worthy cause in the interest of all mankind. This thinking was the catalyst for manifest destiny, the belief that progress is the earthly manifestation of God. The hand of God supposedly pushed the new nation, America, westward and caused the wilderness to surrender to axe and plow. So, how then did we as a society come to value and, in many cases, revere nature as wilderness or wild nature? In our next presentation, we will examine how certain cultural products acquired aesthetic significance and contributed to the development of American appreciation of wild nature.